My mother-in-law smiled when she handed me the glass. "A special birthday spritzer," she said, but what she didn't know was that I'd seen her slip something into it. So I smiled back, took the tray, and quietly switched glasses hers for her husband's. 45 minutes later, the man who always mocked me for being just a teacher was curled up in the bathroom, violently sick, and across the table she looked at me. That's when she realized I knew. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell. I just sat there and let her watch everything fall apart. Have you ever been betrayed by someone who smiled in your face? Drop your story in the comments. And if you've ever been underestimated, hit that like button. This story is for you. My name is Caleb Thompson. I'm 58 years old. I teach English literature at a public high school just outside Providence, Rhode Island. 31 years, same district. I've coached speech teams, written college recommendation letters in the middle of the night, and bought winter coats for kids who had none. It's not glamorous, but I sleep well. I've never been a loud man, never needed to be. Some men flex their wealth, their voices, their politics. Me, I trust silence and I trust books. I trust the truth, especially when it's slow and patient. I've been a father to one. Miranda, my wife's daughter, is from a previous marriage. She was 8 when I met her, 11 when she first called me dad, and 22 when I walked her down the aisle like she'd always been mine. But Miranda didn't just come with paint-stained jeans and a head full of dreams. She came with her grandmother, Margaret Kingston. Have you ever met someone whose voice is soft but their words always manage to cut? That's Margaret. Not cruel, not in the obvious ways. She never raised her voice, never cursed, but she wielded presence the way most people wield weapons. Margaret didn't hate me outright. That would have been easier. No, Margaret did something worse. She dismissed me. It was her birthday dinner that Sunday. Margaret was turning 74 and Miranda, ever the peacemaker, insisted we go. "She's making an effort," Miranda said in the car.
Can we just show up and be kind?
I nodded, not because I believed it, but because I loved Miranda. I wore the gray button-down she gave me for Father's Day. I shaved, bought an overpriced bottle of wine that I knew Margaret would call cute, and we arrived at the Kingston house at 6:10 p.m. The lawn was perfect, the porch light already on. Margaret opened the door wearing pearls like always, and that expression that's somewhere between a smirk and a sermon. "Caleb," she said, brushing the air near my cheek. "Glad you could join us." Her husband Richard stood behind her glass of scotch and hand expression flat as ever. I stepped inside. The table was set for 8. Gleaming silverware cloth napkins folded into origami fans, the kind of dinner that screams intention. Miranda took her usual spot at the end of the table. I sat diagonally across from Richard. Same place I always sit, just under that oil painting of Margaret's father, General Edward Kingston. The general stared down at me like he always had eyes locked, jaw clenched. Dinner began like any other Kingston dinner. Margaret talked about her latest charity project, the garden club, and a bridge tournament she hosted. Richard complained about lazy city council people and read stock updates from his phone. I smiled, nodded, and passed the salt. Then came the drinks. "Oh," Margaret said, rising from her chair. "I almost forgot I made something special, my birthday blend." She disappeared into the kitchen. When she returned, she was carrying a silver tray. 8 glasses arranged neatly, but 2 were separated slightly from the rest. I watched as she lingered over one glass in particular. Her hand moved quickly beneath the tray. She adjusted the angle, then smiled. "This one," she said, turning toward me, "is for you." She placed it in front of me with a satisfied elegance. The drink looked harmless, fizzy, citrusy, a hint of green. But there was a shimmer on the surface, faint. Too faint for most to see, but I'd seen it before. In a different life, when a student once slipped Xanax into a bottle at a party and swore it was Gatorade. I'd driven him to the ER myself. I looked at Margaret. She didn't blink. I stood up. "Let me help you with the others," I said. She hesitated. "Caleb, I've got it." I insist. I took the tray. As I turned toward the table, I made the switch. My glass, the special one, now sat at Richard's place. We toasted. Miranda raised her glass to her mother. Richard raised his to nobody in particular. I raised mine but didn't drink. 45 minutes later, Richard was sweating, pale, eyes unfocused. Excuse me," he muttered, rising from his chair. He didn't make it to the bathroom in time. We heard at the violent, unmistakable sound of retching. Miranda leapt from her seat. Dad Margaret followed, napkin in hand. I sat quietly. The special glass was still full in front of me, untouched. Margaret returned alone a few minutes later. Her face was composed, but her eyes darted to my glass, then to me. She knew, and I knew she knew. Dinner ended awkwardly. I offered to help clean up. Margaret declined. Miranda kissed her on the cheek and said we'd call tomorrow. In the car, Miranda said softly, "That was strange." "Your father seemed unwell," I said. "Yeah, maybe food poisoning." "Maybe." We didn't speak the rest of the way home. Later that night, when Miranda had gone to bed, I went to the garage. I took the glass, the one Margaret had intended for me, wrapped it in a towel and placed it inside a small lunch cooler I hadn't used in years. Then I texted someone I hadn't spoken to since he was in high school. Josh Carmichael, a former student, bright kid now working at a private toxicology lab in Pawtucket. I kept it short. "Josh Caleb Thompson, you still working with chemical analysis?" "Yes, wow, Mr. T, what's up?" "I need something tested quietly." 3 days later, I had the results. Lorazepam formulas dissolved into alcohol. Not fatal, but enough to knock a man out cold. Enough to make someone miss an event, slur their speech, or appear drunk. Enough to make someone look unstable. I held the report in my hands for a long time. She didn't want to kill me. That would have been too obvious. She just wanted to remove me from Miranda's gallery opening the next morning. From future dinners, from their narrative. Margaret Kingston had tried to erase me, not with malice, with strategy. But she made one mistake. She underestimated a man who had built his life one quiet decision at a time. And now I was about to return the favor. Margaret Kingston knew how to wage war without weapons. She knew how to discredit without saying a word. How to look at you just long enough to leave a bruise that nobody else could see. She didn't believe in confrontation, only control. That's what made her dangerous. But what Margaret didn't count on was that I wasn't trying to win her approval anymore. I was done playing her game. She'd tried to humiliate me, maybe not publicly, but surgically. She'd tried to make me miss Miranda's gallery opening that following Monday, where Miranda would speak in front of donors and press about the person who inspired her. Me. I knew exactly how Margaret wanted it to go. I'd be absent. She'd be confused and concerned. Miranda would be disappointed. Doubt would bloom quietly, methodically, and one day she'd look at me the way her grandmother always did. But Margaret miscalculated something essential. I had seen this pattern before. I spent the next week reviewing everything, not from anger, but from observation. That's how I survive. I observe, I notice. I remember. It was the first time she called me temporary at a Christmas dinner. The time she accidentally cropped me out of family photos. The fundraiser where she introduced me to her friends, not as Miranda's father, but Elaine's second husband. And then there were the whispered suggestions. "Miranda, don't you think Caleb's job is a bit draining for a man his age? Maybe you too should consider counseling. Sometimes men just fade." It hadn't seemed like much in the moment. 100 little nicks. But now it felt like part of a blueprint. I started digging. Not through anger, through habit. I've graded thousands of papers, spotted dozens of plagiarized essays. I know when something doesn't line up. It began with her prescriptions. Margaret always kept her pills in the same ivory lacquered cabinet beside the fridge. She was never discreet about them. In fact, she liked to rattle them just enough for you to hear. A few years ago, I drove her to a pharmacy when Richard was out of town. She complained loudly about needing a backup doctor who understood her better. I remembered that phrase. I checked the pill bottle I'd once helped carry her full name dosage, and the prescribing physician were all on the label. Now I looked him up, and then another and another. 3 doctors, 3 prescriptions, all for lorazepam or its cousins, all slightly different armacies, spread across 2 counties. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was the intent. She wasn't just taking medication. She was stockpiling control. I kept my distance from Miranda during those days. Not because I was angry with her, far from it, but because I knew what was coming. I needed her to see it with her own eyes. People like Margaret had a gift. They didn't just control the narrative, they preloaded it. They planted versions of you inside other people's heads until no one knew what was real anymore. And Miranda, she loved her grandmother. The bond between them was layered, tangled. Guilt, gratitude, grief, all woven into a single thread. I wasn't going to cut it with a knife. That never works. I needed a mirror. The first crack came from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Her name was Claire Evans. She used to work as Margaret's housekeeper. Quiet woman, early 40s, 3 kids. Fired 4 years ago, allegedly, for stealing a brooch. A piece of jewelry Margaret later claimed turned up in a drawer. I found Claire on Facebook. She was running a small catering business now. I sent a message. Brief, respectful. Claire, this is Caleb Thompson. I used to be your son's English teacher, and I'm Margaret Kingston's son-in-law. I believe you were wronged, and I think I've recently experienced what you went through. If you're willing to talk, I'd be deeply grateful. She replied within the hour. You're not the first one she's tried to erase. I'll call you. That call changed everything. Claire told me about the games. How Margaret would give her different instructions than Richard, then reprimand her in front of guests for incompetence. How she once served a guest the wrong wine only to find out Margaret had replaced the labels. How in the final week she'd offered Claire tea, and 15 minutes later, Claire found herself dizzy sweating, slurring her words. She'd left before anyone else noticed. Margaret later told everyone she'd smelled alcohol on Claire's breath. She does it in a way that no one can prove, Claire said. She erases people without touching them. I asked Claire if she had anything, messages, notes, photos. She said, I don't, but someone else might. The next day, a manila envelope showed up at my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a thumb drive, one file, a video, Margaret in the kitchen 2 nights ago. My spritzer, her hand, the vial. No sound, just the image. But it was enough. Then I recognized something even more damning. Her eyes. The way she looked over her shoulder. Not once, but twice. She wasn't panicking, she was calculating. I watched it 3 times. The still frame of her slipping something into my glass burned into my memory. Then came a second video from the hallway camera. Richard clutching his stomach. Margaret is helping him. Whispering, barely audible. You weren't supposed to drink that. He groaned. What the hell did you do, Margaret? She snapped. He was getting too comfortable. He was always too comfortable. Richard, you're losing it. Her voice cold. No, I'm reminding everyone of who's in charge. I sat in my office for hours, not thinking about revenge, not even justice, just clarity. All the pieces were there now. She hadn't lost her mind. She wasn't ill. She was precise. And for the first time I realized she'd been rehearsing this for years on other people. Smaller situations, minor humiliations, carefully planned disappearances from family conversations. This was never about me. It was about control. The final piece came from Miranda herself without knowing it. One evening, she walked into my study, laptop in hand. Grandma wants to know if you'd photograph her for the charity board's website. I stared at her. She asked for me. Miranda nodded. She said, You're the best with natural light. I didn't respond, just said sure. Saturday morning, I arrived at the Kingston house alone. Margaret greeted me with her usual mask of civility. You're early, she said. Better for lighting, I replied. I set up my camera, arranged her seat, adjusted the background. Then I opened my bag, reached in, and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was the lab report, the still images, the hallway transcript, and a typed copy of her prescriptions from 3 doctors. Her hands trembled as she unfolded each page. This is absurd, she said. I would never. We both know what happened, I said calmly. She sat back, her expression hardened. You're not good enough for her, she said quietly. You never were. Then why not just say that to her? I asked, why the pills? Her voice sharpened. Because people like you don't respond to honesty. You respond to consequence. I stood. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to offer you a choice. Her eyes narrowed. You're going to tell Richard what you did. You're going to back off permanently. No more manipulation. No more lies. You will treat Miranda like a grown woman, and I like the father she chose. She scoffed. And if I don't, I open my case. Took out a flash drive. There are 7 copies. 1 for Richard, 1 for Miranda, 1 for the gallery director, 1 for the charity board, 1 for your garden club, 1 for your church. And the 7th, I smiled. That one's for you. So you remember the thing about people like Margaret is they don't unravel in a dramatic burst. They fray silently, thread by thread, and at first no one notices, especially not the ones closest to them. After our confrontation in her sunroom, Margaret didn't scream. She didn't throw me out or demand the flash drive back. She just sat there still as a statue, her fingers resting on the corner of the envelope like it might bite her. When I left, I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. That part of the war was over. But the next battle had already begun, and this one would take place quietly inside Miranda's heart. It started 3 days later. I was in the laundry room when Miranda came in holding an old photo album, one of the big leather-bound ones her grandmother used to keep on the bookshelf beneath the stairs. She looked dazed. "I was looking for baby pictures," she said. "For that through the years montage my friend Olivia is doing for the gallery's donor event. I thought I'd use one with you in it." She sat down on the step, the album open in her lap. "I can't find any." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've gone through 2 full albums already. Mom's birthdays, Christmas, school plays, Grandma's garden parties, and you're just not in them." I stayed quiet because I had noticed the same thing years ago. She flipped to a Christmas page. Miranda at 10 in a red velvet dress. Elaine was behind her smiling. Margaret is standing beside the tree. A blank space on the far left cropped tight. "That's the year you gave me that journal," Miranda whispered. "The leather one with the brass buckle. I wrote in it every night for 2 years. I remember you were standing next to me when Mom took that picture." I nodded. I was. She didn't say anything for a while, then softly, "Why would she?" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Over the next week, Miranda grew quiet. Not distant, but quieter than usual. Like her thoughts had shifted to a lower frequency. I didn't press. I didn't lead. I just stayed where I'd always been, close, steady, patient. That's what people forget about truth. You can't hand it to someone like a gift. You have to let them walk into it, unwrap it themselves. And she was starting to unwrap it. One night I found her in my study sitting at my desk with her laptop open, scrolling through digital copies of her college photo archive. "I thought maybe it was just the print album," she said. But look, she turned the screen toward me. It was a shot of her art exhibition from her sophomore year. Miranda is standing next to her first oil-on-canvas piece. Elaine smiled proudly. I remembered that night well. I had driven 8 hours through a snowstorm to get there after school. But in the photo, I wasn't in frame again. "Grandma posted this on Facebook that week," Miranda said, captioned it. "So proud of my girls." She paused. "I remember you standing just off to the side holding your coat. You never even made it into the pictures." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "She's been curating the story," Miranda said finally. "Hasn't she?" I nodded once. "She always has." A few days later, a package arrived at the house. No note, no return address. Inside a box of old videotapes, the kind you'd need a mini DV player to watch. On top, a yellow sticky note in familiar handwriting. Thought these might matter now. Claire Evans, Margaret's former housekeeper. I hadn't told Miranda that Claire had reached out. Not yet, but this changed everything. We set up the old player in the living room that night, hooked it up to the TV with a mess of cables and adapters. The first tape started with a family barbecue summer 2006. Miranda was 15. Elaine was still alive. I was manning the grill. Miranda pointed. "There you are," I smiled. Proof I existed. Then the video panned over to Margaret, seated under a patio umbrella, a glass of wine in hand. She called Miranda over. "Sweetheart," she said on the tape, "let's take a picture, just you and your mother." Elaine looked confused. "What about Caleb?" Margaret waved her off. "Let's keep this one classic." On the tape, Miranda frowned. "He's part of the family." Margaret laughed. "Of course, darling. We'll do another one later." Later never came. The second tape was worse. Thanksgiving 2009, my first year hosting. Margaret was speaking into the camera, not realizing it was recording already. "You know what the problem is with men like him?" She said to someone off camera. "Maybe Claire. They confuse usefulness with worth. He's useful, but he'll never matter." Miranda sat frozen on the couch. Her eyes didn't leave the screen. The video ended. Static filled the room. She stood up and walked out without a word. I didn't follow. She came back the next morning, eyes rimmed red, holding a dusty leather-bound journal. "The one you gave me," she said quietly. "I found it in storage." She flipped it open, turned to a page dated just after Elaine's funeral. I remembered that time. Miranda was 19, trying to finish college, holding herself together with duct tape and poetry. She read aloud, "I don't know what a father is supposed to feel like. But when I came home tonight and Caleb had put fresh towels in my room and left a note that said, 'I'm here when you're ready,' I realized I didn't need to know what a father is supposed to be. I already had one." She closed the journal. "I don't know why I forgot that," she whispered. "Why did I let her bend it?" "Because she's good at bending things," I said, "especially truth." Miranda sat beside me on the couch. "I need to ask you something." Of course, she took a breath. That night at her birthday dinner, you switched the glasses, didn't you? I looked at her slowly, steadily. I did, she nodded. I thought so. Later that day, Miranda called Margaret. I didn't ask what she said. All I knew was that the call lasted 12 minutes. And when it ended, Miranda walked out to the porch, sat beside me, and handed me her phone. I want you to read this, she said. It was a text message from Margaret. The last in a thread of 10. All cold, all deflective. But the last one said, "You've always been too forgiving. That's your mother in you. He's manipulating you, and one day you'll see it." I handed the phone back. She still thinks she can control the ending, Miranda said. But the difference is I'm not the same girl anymore. She looked out over the yard. You know what the worst part is? What? She never had to like you. But she couldn't stand that I loved you. I didn't say anything, just reached over, held her hand. Sometimes silence is the deepest kind of truth. I've learned this much. The moment you name the truth, people begin to choose sides. And those who've lived in fear of being disbelieved, they begin to whisper. Some quietly, some with urgency, but always with relief. That week, the house stayed unusually still. Miranda barely touched her sketch pads, didn't play her usual jazz in the mornings. She moved with an alertness I hadn't seen in her since Elaine's diagnosis. Like she was balancing a truth too heavy for one hand. I gave her space. I made tea. I listened. And the world started answering back. It began with a letter, handwritten, left inside our mailbox without postage. The paper was thick, formal. The ink was black and pressed. The envelope simply said, "For Caleb, it's time." Inside was a note on stationery from St. Gabriel's Foundation for Arts and Literacy, a charity board Margaret chaired for 12 years. I knew something was wrong when she tried to remove you from the annual report list without telling anyone. Said you were unreliable and out of alignment with the family's image. But I remembered how you used to run the summer workshops for us. Quiet, generous. You made my daughter believe she could write. That mattered to me. I didn't know how to speak then. I do now. Signed, Susan Everett. I hadn't seen Susan in over a decade. She was a volunteer parent from the early years of the foundation. Miranda's classmate's mom. I remembered her vividly firm handshake, warm eyes, always offering to clean up after events. She'd attached a printout meeting minutes, one in which Margaret had strongly recommended cutting ties with me due to erratic behavior and disciplinary concerns, none of which had ever happened. My heart didn't race, it sank. Because the more the truth surfaced, the more I realized this wasn't about one glass of spiked spritzer. It wasn't even about me. It was about a system Margaret had perfected. One by one, she had discredited anyone she couldn't control. That afternoon, I received an email from Claire Evans, the former housekeeper who'd sent the tapes. Subject line, "There's someone else you need to speak to." The body of the message was short. A name, a phone number, one sentence. She was engaged to Miranda before Elaine passed away. At first, I thought Claire had made a mistake. Miranda was never engaged before Michael, the painter she dated after college. Right, wrong. I called the number. It rang 6 times. Then a voice answered. "This is Thomas Rivera." I paused, cleared my throat. "Thomas, my name is Caleb Thompson. You don't know me, but you used to know my daughter, Miranda Kingston." Silence, then carefully. "I haven't heard that name in years. We met at a coffee shop near Boston. He was in his early 40s now. Wore glasses, cardigan, the kind of person who instinctively holds doors open even for strangers. He looked nervous, not afraid. More like someone who'd built a new life and wasn't sure whether to invite the past inside. I didn't think anyone would ever ask about that time, he said. We sat by the window. He sipped his drink, then began. I was in love with her. We were going to get married. We'd picked a venue. A month later, she stopped returning my calls. Said she didn't trust me anymore, that I'd been lying to her. His voice tightened. I hadn't. I let the silence hang, offering him space. Her grandmother, he said slowly, showed her an email. Said it was from me, that I'd been seeing someone else while she was abroad. It wasn't true, but the email looked real. I raised an eyebrow. Do you still have it? He nodded. I saved everything. He sent it that night. The forwarded message was expertly written. Dates aligned, signature matched. But 2 things stood out. The email address it came from wasn't his. It was close 1 letter off, and the IP address traced back to Kingston Property Holdings, Margaret's company. I stared at the screen in the dark. My jaw set, my hand still. The same pattern, just more sophisticated. She hadn't just erased people from pictures. She'd erased them from real life. and Miranda never even knew she had once been engaged. I printed everything. The forged email, the IP trace, a dated screenshot of Miranda and Thomas in a college campus hallway, arms wrapped tight, happy young. Then I placed it into a manila folder labeled Simply Things That Were Taken. Later that week, Miranda was painting in the garage. She hadn't said much since finding the tapes, but I noticed she'd started to draw Margaret differently. Less form, more shadow, eyes that stared without warmth, lines that didn't resolve into smiles. I handed her the folder, said nothing. She opened it slowly, the color drained from her face. "This is Thomas." She looked at me, eyes clouded. I was engaged. I nodded. "You were?" "I don't remember." "You were told not to." She swallowed hard. Tears didn't fall, but her voice broke. "I don't know what's mine anymore. What memories are real? What was edited? What I threw away because she told me to?" I didn't interrupt. She flipped through the rest. Saw the evidence. The digital fingerprints. The way truth had been scrubbed, rewarded, and reconstructed. Then she whispered, "She's been at this for decades." I placed my hand on hers. "You still know who you are and who you became despite it." That night, Miranda did something I hadn't expected. She called Owen, her cousin, Margaret's only grandson, the golden boy. He was polite, formal, still living under his parents' roof and Margaret's narrative. But Miranda was calm, clear. "I need you and Vanessa to come to dinner this Sunday," she said. "We have something to show you, and it's time you saw it for yourself." Sunday came. Vanessa arrived first, holding a folder of her own. She hugged Miranda tightly, then looked at me and nodded. Owen followed, stiff and unsure. He sat down slowly, scanning our living room like a trap might spring from the bookshelves. Then we pressed play. The same tapes, the same video of Margaret spiking my drink, the same hallway argument. When it ended, Owen leaned back. That could be edited. Miranda turned to him. "Owen, stop, look at me." She pointed to a frame. "That's your grandmother." "Our grandmother?" "What she said, what she's been doing, it's all there." "She wouldn't." He began, but Vanessa cut him off. "She did it to me too." Owen froze. "What?" Vanessa reached into her bag, pulled out a note, handwritten. "She slipped this into my purse 2 years ago. Said it was an accident, but it wasn't." Owen took it, read aloud. "You'll never be enough. Not for this family. Not for Owen. Not for the future we've planned." His hands shook. "I didn't know." Vanessa wiped a tear from her cheek. "You weren't supposed to." That night after they left, Miranda sat across from me in the kitchen, her hands around a cup of chamomile tea she hadn't touched. "She tried to poison you," she said softly, "and still you didn't destroy her." "No," I said, "because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth." Miranda nodded slowly. "I'm ready now," she said to face her. I reached for her hand. "And I'll be right beside you." We didn't walk into that house to create a scene. We walked in to reclaim something. Not revenge, not apologies, just truth. The kind that had been buried beneath porcelain smiles and carefully manicured lies for decades. Miranda wanted to do it at her grandmother's home on her terms. No drama, no audience, just the three of us sitting in the same living room where Margaret had spent years performing the role of benevolent matriarch. Only this time the mask wouldn't survive the light. It was late Sunday afternoon when we pulled up to the Kingston house. The hydrangeas out front were still blooming, unnaturally bright, the lawn still crisp as a golf course. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But perfection has a sound, and inside that house it had gone silent. Margaret met us at the door, wearing her usual pearls and a linen blouse the color of old champagne. Her expression flickered between confusion and control. "I wasn't expecting you, dear," she told Miranda. "You should have called." Miranda held up the flash drive. "I think you were expecting us. You just hoped we wouldn't come." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the formal sitting room. Richard wasn't home. Margaret didn't offer us tea. The air was thick. Miranda got right to it. "There's something I want you to see." She plugged the drive into the smart TV and played the hallway footage first. No narration, just Margaret's voice, her tone, her intention. Margaret didn't flinch. She crossed her legs and watched her betrayal with the detachment of a person viewing someone else's crime. When it ended, Miranda turned off the screen. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Margaret said, "So that's what this is, a performance." "How ironic," Miranda stared at her. "I loved you," she said softly. "I trusted you more than almost anyone in my life. And you used that trust to shape the version of reality that suited you best. You made me believe things that weren't true about Caleb, about Thomas, about myself. Margaret's expression shifted just slightly, like the gears behind her eyes were recalibrating. You were vulnerable, she said. You needed guidance. Miranda's voice sharpened. No, I needed honesty, and you gave me manipulation dressed as protection. Margaret rose from her chair slowly, deliberately. I kept this family together, she said, her voice growing tighter. When your mother died, it was I who kept you from falling apart. It was me who paid your tuition, who walked you through the estate, who controlled everything Miranda cut in, right down to who I should marry, what I should believe, and who I should erase. Margaret's hands were shaking now, but she masked it by adjusting a ring on her finger. I was protecting you from yourself. You were protecting yourself from losing control. The room fell still. Margaret turned to me then for the first time that evening, her voice like ice sliding across glass, and you sitting there like some noble martyr. Do you think you've won? I met her gaze. I don't need to win. I just need Miranda to see you for who you are. Her face twitched a crack in the glass. She'll forgive me, she said too quickly. Eventually, Miranda stood up. No, I won't, and that was it. That was the break. Not a scream, not a collapse, just a simple, quiet severing. We left without another word. As we stepped outside, I felt the first gust of evening wind. The Kingston house loomed behind us, still immaculate, still hollow. Miranda didn't cry. She didn't look back. Back home, we sat on the porch, watching the dusk settle over the trees. Do you think she believes any of it? Miranda asked. I thought for a moment. I think she believes the story she built, and I think she always has. Miranda exhaled. It's strange realizing your memories aren't just yours. That someone else edited them, curated them like photographs. She glanced over. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. You saw it when you were ready, I said. That's the only time truth ever sticks. She leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat like that for a long time, just breathing, just being. 2 weeks passed. We heard nothing from Margaret, but the silence felt different now. Not threatening, not uncertain, just finished. Then one morning, Miranda got a letter. Handwritten, no return address, just a single page in perfect cursive. You've always been more like your mother than I cared to admit, and perhaps that was my greatest mistake. I hope you find peace in your illusions. I will keep mine. Margaret Kingston. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just a final defense of her narrative. Miranda read it once, folded it, and placed it in the fireplace without a word. The paper curled and vanished into ash. Later that night, as I was grading essays in the study, Miranda walked in carrying a small wooden box. Inside were old photos. Elaine, Miranda, me. Some were faded, others curled at the edges, but one caught my eye. A candid shot of the three of us laughing at the beach toes and the sand hair wild in the wind. I developed this one myself, Miranda said, back in college. I just never printed it until now. She handed it to me because this, she said, was real. There are two kinds of silence. The kind that settles gently between people who understand each other, and the kind that falls like a curtain after the final act when the audience isn't sure whether to applaud or get up and leave. That was the kind of silence we walked into the night of the dinner. It was Richard's idea, strangely enough. He called Miranda the week after the letter from Margaret had burned to ash. Your grandmother wants to host one last family dinner, he said flatly. She's trying. Miranda looked at me across the kitchen table as she relayed it. Trying, she said. She's always trying to steer. To rewrite. Still, she agreed. Not for Margaret, for closure. But this time we'd be the ones directing the evening. I asked her to trust me with the planning, the sequence, the message. Are you sure? She asked. Absolutely, I said. And I'll keep it quiet, clean. And finally the evening was set. Sunday, 7:00 p.m., Kingston House, just family. The last time I'd walked through those doors with evidence in my pocket, I'd left quietly alone, knowing what I held would change everything. This time I was bringing more than paper. I was bringing the truth in her voice. I arrived first early enough to help set the table. Margaret greeted me as if none of it had happened. Caleb, she said with a manufactured warmth. Still like your roast medium. I looked her in the eye. Still prefer it honest. She blinked, the smile wobbling for half a second. Miranda and Owen arrived together. Vanessa followed shortly after with a folder tucked beneath her coat. No one hugged. No one asked how the week had been. By the time we sat, the dining room felt like a stage. Margaret raised her wine glass. To family, she said, to healing. The word sat in my mouth like vinegar, but I lifted my glass. To the truth, I said. The food was elegant. Lamb, rosemary, potatoes, and some kind of truffle thing I didn't touch. Margaret kept the conversation safely shallow. Richard remained quiet, chewing slowly, eyes flicking from face to face. Then came dessert, or rather didn't, because before Margaret could get up to fetch her famous peach cobbler, I spoke. Before we end dinner, I said, "There's something I want to share." I opened the small black case at my feet and pulled out a simple projector. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What is this a tribute?" I said, "To stories, the ones we tell and the ones we hide." I clicked the remote. The projector lit up the cream wall beside her china cabinet. The first image appeared a still frame from the hallway camera. Margaret's hand is holding the vial, her eyes checked over her shoulder, gasps. Silence. The next clip played the hallway argument with Richard. Her voice, her calculation. Richard's hand froze around his fork. Then came the interview clips. Short, spliced, anonymous. A woman's voice. She said I wasn't a good fit for the family image. That if I loved Owen, I'd step away quietly. Another, I was told I had a drinking problem. I've been sober 14 years. The images continued. Soft transitions. Nothing loud, just clarity, no commentary, just evidence. When the final frame faded, I turned off the projector. No one moved. No one touched the untouched dessert plates. Margaret sat stone still, her hands folded on the tablecloth like a woman bracing for a storm she couldn't manipulate. Miranda broke the silence. "I used to think my grandmother was my protector," she said. "I thought she saw things others didn't, that her judgment came from wisdom." She looked across the table. But it wasn't wisdom. It was fear. Fear that if she didn't control everything, she'd disappear. Margaret's lips parted. "That's not it is," Miranda cut in. "You erased people from my life. You fed me curated stories designed to steer me where you wanted, even when it hurt me. Especially when it hurt me." Margaret's face twisted anger or perhaps disbelief that the spell had finally broken. "You're still young," she said. "You'll understand someday what it means to protect someone from themselves." Vanessa spoke next. "You didn't protect anyone. You isolated us. You punished independence. And when we didn't bend, you cut." Even Owen's voice, barely above a whisper, said, "I used to think you were proud of me." Margaret looked at her grandson. I am. "No," he said. "You were proud of your version of me. I stood last, and when I did, I kept it short." "I don't need an apology," I said. "I've lived enough life to know that people don't always give what they owe." I placed a USB drive on the table. "This contains everything. It's yours to keep. Not as blackmail, not as punishment, as memory." Margaret reached for it, but I held it a second longer. "But if you ever try to rewrite Miranda's story again, or mine or anyone else's at this table, then this truth, it won't stay quiet." We left before dessert. There was nothing sweet left to serve. Back home, Miranda sat on the porch with a blanket over her shoulders. "Do you think she'll change?" she asked. I shook my head. "People like Margaret don't change, but they recede when they lose their audience." She exhaled slow and steady. "And if she calls again, you'll know what to say," I said. That night, as we closed the house for bed, I passed the framed photo in the hallway. Miranda and I, sand between our toes, laughter in midair, a real moment unedited. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen, not by Margaret, but by the only person who mattered. 3 days after the dinner, Richard Kingston showed up on my porch. No phone call, no appointment, just a quiet knock at 6:42 in the evening, just after sunset, when the sky had turned the color of old lavender. He stood there in a pressed overcoat, his expression unreadable, holding a manila folder tucked beneath one arm. I opened the door. "Richard," I said simply. "Caleb," he replied, nodding once. "You got a few minutes." I stepped aside. We sat in the den, the same room where I'd once graded essays late into the night and where Miranda had first learned how to write letters to Santa by dictating them to me word for word. Richard looked around as if he were seeing it for the first time. "Didn't think I'd be here," he said after a long pause. "I didn't either," I said. He set the folder on the coffee table but didn't open it yet. I watched that footage again, the one from the hallway. I said nothing, just waited. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, then looked at me. "She's always been commanding," he said. "Even when we were first married, back then it felt like strength. A woman who knew what she wanted, who wouldn't be pushed around." He gave a hollow laugh. I mistook manipulation for elegance. For a while he didn't speak and I didn't push. I've learned that silence often pulls more truth out of a man than questions ever could. Finally, he opened the folder. Inside was a stack of papers, old photographs, letters, a few newspaper clippings yellowing at the edges. After the dinner, he said, I went up to the attic. First time in years. There's a trunk she kept from when she worked in PR before Miranda was born. I'd forgotten about it. He held up one of the photos. It was Margaret Younger sitting beside a woman in a wheelchair holding a microphone. Her sister Richard said, Caroline, stroke survivor, lived with Margaret in her 20s. I leaned forward. I didn't know she had a sister. No one does, Richard said, because Margaret never talks about her. He passed me the photo, then unfolded a typewritten letter. It was dated July 12th, 1985. I'm sorry, Maggie. I told them the truth about the money, about how you moved it, they asked. I didn't lie. I thought we were past that. I looked up at him. She cut Caroline out after that, Richard said. Caroline passed away in assisted living, alone. Margaret never attended the funeral. My throat tightened. I don't think Miranda even knows she had a great aunt, I murmured. She doesn't, Richard confirmed. And that's not all. He reached into the folder and pulled out a birth certificate. Not Miranda's, Elaine's, only the mother's name was listed. The father's line was blank. I looked at him. She told me Elaine's father died in Korea. Richard said, decorated, honorably discharged posthumously. That's the story she told everyone. He paused. But I found this in the trunk too. He handed me a newspaper clipping. It was an arrest report, 1959, for a man named James Haar. Fraud, embezzlement, domestic battery, and at the bottom, next of kin, Margaret Kingston, fiancé. He wasn't a war hero. He was a con man. I think Richard said that Margaret's first experience with betrayal was being found out, not being lied to. I sat back. The picture was clearer now and darker. She's been running ever since, I said. Richard nodded slowly, building layers, personas, stories to shield the truth, to control it. He closed the folder gently. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness, Caleb. I know I enabled it. I stayed silent. I let her frame people, Claire Thomas. You because silence is comfortable. It doesn't make you the villain, just invisible. His voice cracked just once. And now my grandchildren don't look at me the same way. He looked up. I wanted you to have this, he said, gesturing to the folder, not as ammunition but as context. Thank you, I said. Then he surprised me. I think I'd like to talk to someone, he said. A professional. I didn't smirk. Didn't offer a clever response. I just nodded. I think that's the bravest thing you've said tonight. After he left, I sat alone in the den, flipping through the documents again. Each page felt like a bone from the skeleton she'd buried for decades. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt mournful, because truth is not a sword. It's a mirror, and when you hold it up to a legacy built on fear, it reflects every face that went along with it, including yours. The next day, I showed the file to Miranda. She cried, but not for herself. She cried for her mother and for the sister she never knew existed. She cried because the woman who'd raised her with such precision and pride had built her life atop a graveyard of secrets. And when the tears stopped, she looked at me and said, I want to paint her one last time, but this time I won't paint the woman she wanted to be. The portrait took 2 weeks. She called it the matriarch. It was bold, stark. Margaret's face aged and unretouched, one eye in shadow. Her hands were not folded in prayer, but clenched around the handle of a chest piece. I didn't ask what it meant. I already knew. The day she unveiled it at the gallery, no one said Margaret's name, but everyone understood. And when the crowd asked Miranda who inspired the piece, she smiled softly and said, Some women build kingdoms, others build cages. This was the story of learning the difference. Families have a way of folding themselves into stories, not just the ones they tell out loud, but the ones they pass through glances at dinner tables, through empty photo frames, through who gets remembered and who gets edited out. After the gallery opening, Miranda's painting made its rounds faster than we expected. The portrait, the matriarch, stirred conversations in corners. Whispers from board members, artists, and relatives who had for years pretended not to see the cracks in the Kingston family glass. It didn't take long before the phone calls began. And this time they weren't directed at Miranda. They were directed at me. The first came from Aunt Harriet, Margaret's older sister-in-law. Caleb, she said over the line, her voice brittle but controlled. I don't pretend to understand everything going on, but I saw that painting and I saw what wasn't said, which in this family usually means everything. I waited. Is it true? She asked. What did Margaret do to Thomas? What did she try to do to you? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, it's not about what she did. It's about what she kept doing and what others kept allowing. There was a long pause, then a quiet reply. Well, I allowed it too, didn't I? That call was the first crack in what used to be a unified front. Soon came more. A cousin in Virginia, who'd been ostracized over a marriage that Margaret had deemed beneath the family. A second cousin in Connecticut who'd left the charity board mysteriously 2 years ago, now sharing emails that Margaret had sent warning him not to undermine the Kingston brand. Even Owen's younger brother Samuel texted Miranda, I always thought you were overreacting. I'm sorry. I was just scared of what it would cost to stand up to her. You were right. Truth once it lands doesn't whisper. It echoes. Margaret for her part went silent, but Richard kept talking privately. Miranda and I learned he'd begun attending sessions with a retired therapist who used to volunteer at the foundation, not as penance, but to understand his role in the house of mirrors they'd built. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. Then came the invitation, not from Margaret's niece, who was organizing the Kingston family summer reunion in Newport. Every year, the family gathered at the summer estate. It had become a tradition, a theater of togetherness curated by Margaret down to the seating charts and the brand of sparkling water. This year, the invitation looked different. The card said, We invite all branches of the Kingston family and all truths. Below it, a handwritten note, Miranda, we want you to come. And Caleb, too. It's time the rest of us learned how to listen. We debated it for 3 days. Miranda paced our living room more times than I could count. She made pros and cons lists on sticky notes, talked to Vanessa, talked to Owen, and finally she looked at me. I'm not going to that house to make peace, she said. I'm going to tell the truth to their faces. And if they still choose to stand with her, then at least I'll know. I nodded. Then I'll be there beside you. Newport was clouded and gray that day. A calm coastal quietness that suited us just fine. The family house sat on its cliff like it always had, pristine, powerful, and pretending to be timeless. Inside, the long dining table was set for 20. Margaret was already seated at the head. Of course she was, but for the first time, no one rose when she did. Instead, all eyes turned to Miranda as she entered. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even sit down. She just opened a manila envelope and began to speak. She laid out the facts. What Margaret had done to her fiancé, what she had attempted with me, the fabricated emails, the pills in the spritzer, the forged documents, the cropped photos, the missing names, the patterns. Then she said, Some of you saw this and said nothing. Some of you knew something felt wrong but told yourselves it wasn't your place, and some of you believed her. She turned toward Margaret. I believed you too, she said, for most of my life, until the weight of your version of me stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like suffocation. Margaret stared back, arms crossed, face carved of granite. She didn't interrupt, didn't apologize. She simply waited for it to end. And when it did, she said only this. Your mother would be ashamed. The room froze. But Miranda didn't flinch. No, she said she'd be proud because I finally learned to stop calling control love. We left soon after. Didn't stay for the lobster rolls. Didn't wait to hear who took whose side, because the point wasn't to change them. The point was to stop living under their weather. The next morning, Miranda woke up early and walked into my study. She carried a small box in her hands, one I hadn't seen in years. I found this in Mom's old dresser, she said. It's mine now, but I think it belongs to both of us. Inside were sketches, drawings Miranda had done as a child. Some had notes scribbled in the corners, little comments from Elaine in blue ink. But one drawing stopped me. It was a crayon sketch, a girl holding the hand of a man in a sweater vest. The sun is overhead, labeled in uneven handwriting, me and Dad. Miranda smiled. I must have drawn this when I was 8. I looked at the date on the back. June 12, 1997, the week I moved in. You knew then, I said. She nodded. I just forgot for a while. She made me forget. I wrapped my arms around her. You remembered in time, I said, and that's all that matters. Some victories aren't loud. They don't come with confetti or applause. They come in manila envelopes, plain font, and legal language so clinical it nearly sterilizes the emotions behind it. But I knew what it meant the moment I opened the letter. So did she. It arrived in late October, just as the leaves in Cambridge began to blush their way into winter. The return address was from Gordon Burke and Wells, the Kingston family's longtime legal counsel. same firm that handled the foundation's taxes, the estates, and the so-called succession planning. Inside on thick ivory paper was a revised codicil to the Kingston Trust effective immediately. Richard Kingston as trustee had formally transferred 37% ownership of the Kingston Foundation's assets and voting rights to Miranda Elaine Kingston. A second amendment named me Caleb Rowan as co-signatory and board advisor, with the power to veto financial decisions about family members including Margaret. No ceremony, no ribbon cutting, just 2 initials at the bottom, RK. I wasn't surprised Richard had done it. Not entirely. After the Newport confrontation, I'd heard rumors through gallery circuits and legal whispers that Richard had begun cleansing the books, as one associate put it. But seeing it in writing was something else entirely. I handed it to Miranda. She sat in silence for almost a full minute. Then she'll try to undo this. I nodded. Let her try. We didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, Margaret showed up at Miranda's studio. No assistant, no driver, no pearl brooch, just her gray wool coat damp from rain and eyes that hadn't slept. Miranda opened the door halfway. Margaret began, her voice low, not quite trembling but close. We need to talk, do we? Miranda asked. I made mistakes, Margaret said. No, Miranda replied calmly. You made a pattern. Margaret's jaw set. You don't understand what it means to hold a legacy. She snapped. You've never built anything from the ground up. I watched you burn people for bricks, Miranda said, voice like glass. That's not building. That's conquering. There was a long pause. Then Margaret, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in decades, said, You're going to ruin this family. Miranda stared at her for a moment and then said the quietest, most dangerous sentence I'd ever heard. This family was already ruined. I'm just choosing not to be part of the wreckage. And she closed the door. The next week the foundation board convened. It wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a quiet rearrangement. Richard formally stepped down. Miranda took his place. I declined a title, but accepted an advisory position that would give me oversight of ethical governance, especially where financial decisions intersected with family. Margaret, of course, voted no. She was overruled. No shouting, no drama, just silence and one final signature. Weeks later, Miranda and I sat on the back porch of our house with mugs of peppermint tea. She watched the wind move through the trees like they were answering a question no one had asked aloud. I'm not angry anymore, she said softly. I know, I replied. I'm tired, she added, but not the kind of tired that breaks you, the kind that comes after you finally set something down. I reached into the envelope I'd been carrying for days, slipped a small velvet box across the table. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a simple gold chain with a pendant, a tiny detailed sketch of a tree engraved on the back. Rooted, not trapped, her breath caught. It's the tree from the cabin, she whispered. Where did you first start sketching again? I said. Where I first saw you see yourself. She closed the box and placed her hand over mine. You remembered always, I said. We didn't host a press release, didn't publish a tell-all. We just got to work. Miranda began restructuring the foundation's outreach programs, bringing in voices that had long been shut out: Indigenous artists, single mothers, formerly incarcerated creators who painted in between court dates. I started a mentorship program for underfunded art teachers in public schools, naming it quietly after Elaine and Margaret. She faded, not all at once but slowly, deliberately, as power moved without her permission for the first time in decades. The board stopped asking for her input. The gala committee no longer reserved her table, and perhaps most poignantly, no one feared her anymore. One evening I received a handwritten note from Richard. It wasn't long. Caleb, I don't know if I was a good man, but I know I raised a daughter who finally became a good woman. Thank you for not raising your voice when you had every reason to. Thank you for staying even when the house was collapsing. You saved her. And in a way you saved me too. Sometimes I think about what might have happened if I'd taken that sip from the glass all those years ago. If I hadn't noticed the edge of her pinky twist as she passed it to me. If I'd trusted that smile like so many had. But I didn't, and because of that we're here. We didn't host a victory party. There was no cake, no champagne. No, we showed them speeches. Because what we felt in the end wasn't triumph. It was peace. And peace, unlike revenge, doesn't shout. It whispers. It arrives when you no longer need to be right, only free. I watched Margaret slip out of public life slowly. First came her resignation from the Women's Arts Council. Then a mutual departure from her museum consultancy role. She canceled her holiday luncheon for the first time in 30 years. No press announcement, no farewell gala, just absence. And in that space, something else finally grew. Miranda and I moved out of the Kingston estate within 6 months. We bought a modest craftsman house on the southern edge of Cambridge 1 with a garden, a sunroom, and enough creaky wood floors to make it feel like home. She used the sunroom for her sketches. I took over the basement for my books and clay work. We slept well. We laughed often. We made tea at 7 a.m. like clockwork, then forgot the mugs by 7:15. We were not trying to win anymore. We were just trying to live. One day, Miranda came back from the foundation holding a letter from a woman named Alana. She said, "Says her daughter just got a grant. Single mom used to paint on the back of cereal boxes while working at the nursing home. Now she's headed to her first exhibit in Boston." I nodded. "Did you know she named the piece after you?" Miranda added, "It's called Rooted, Not Trapped." I smiled. I suppose that makes us patrons of poetic justice. We were invited to attend the show. It was held in a converted warehouse in Roxbury, the kind of place Margaret would have scoffed at for not having proper ventilation or gallery lighting. The walls dripped with emotion, not perfectly lit works of grandeur, but raw, unfinished canvases that told the truth. Stories in paint, scars turned into color. Alana's daughter found us near the coffee table. "You believed in me," she said to Miranda, holding back tears, "when no one else even saw me." "You made yourself visible," Miranda replied gently. "We just made sure the lights were on." That night back at home, I opened my journal, the one I hadn't written in for months. And I began simply, "Some legacies are inherited, others are chosen." I don't think Margaret ever understood that part. For her legacy was preservation, holding a position, maintaining the illusion of dignity through control. For us, legacy became creation, making space even when none had been made for us. There's a difference. And it's the difference that saved Miranda and saved me too. People sometimes ask if I forgave her, and the truth is no, not in the way they mean. I didn't erase what she did. I didn't excuse the manipulation, the humiliation, or the way she almost cost Miranda everything. But I released it. Forgiveness isn't always about making peace with the person. Sometimes it's about making peace with the wound. Years later, we received a notice that Margaret had passed. No fanfare, just a quiet hospice discharge report. She'd left no statement, no note, but the will. She tried one last move, naming Miranda in the estate but tying it to strict conditions, returned to the Kingston home, resumed the family board seat, and agreed to maintain the public standard of the Kingston name. Miranda declined. She took nothing. Instead, she wrote a letter and donated Margaret's designer wardrobe, untouched since 1986, to a non-profit supporting domestic violence survivors. "I think someone else needs to rewrite what this fabric means," she told me. I didn't respond, just nodded. Some things don't need words. One morning, I was planting basil in the back garden when I heard Miranda call my name. "Come here." I wiped my hands and stepped onto the porch. She was holding something. An envelope inside was a certificate, Community Healing Art Center, grand opening dedication, and at the bottom, for Caleb Rowan, the man who proved you can rebuild what others tried to erase. I stared at it for a long time, then said, "I thought this was your project." She looked at me the way she always did when she was telling the truth without saying it directly. "It still is," she whispered. "But everything I've built, I built from the ground you helped me stand on. Sometimes late at night I sit in the studio alone, not because I'm haunted, but because I'm grateful. Grateful that I didn't raise my voice when I could have. Grateful that I did not pour gasoline into the chaos she created. Grateful that I chose to wait, to observe, to act in silence, because when you wait long enough, lies rot. And truth has a way of blooming. I end this story not with a twist, not even with revenge, but with a beginning, because the most radical thing we did was not to strike back. It was to live well anyway. Have you ever chosen quiet strength over chaos? If you've ever been underestimated, erased, or betrayed but decided to rise anyway, this space is for you. Let me know your story in the comments. I read every single one, and if this story touched something in you, hit like. Subscribe to Revenge with David. We share stories like this every week of quiet power, unexpected justice, and starting again on your terms. Wherever you're watching from, be safe, be seen, and walk forward with truth.